Great. Well, everyone, welcome to the Youth Mental Health Project's Young Men Mental Health Forum. We are so excited to have this very important conversation during Youth Mental Health Awareness Month, or Awareness Week, I apologize. I'm joined by some really cool panelists that have some powerful stories about their mental health and their journeys. I'll let these guys introduce themselves momentarily, but today's discussion will kind of center around mental health from the male perspective. Really exploring the role of gender-related social pressures that limit and create barriers to seeking mental health care. Before we jump into the conversation today, I want to make sure people understand the powerful mission of the Youth Mental Health Project. That mission is we educate, empower, and support families and communities to better understand the care of mental health of our youth. Today, hopefully today's conversation not only adds some value to your life, but also destigmatizes the discussion around mental health. I will let the gentlemen kind of introduce themselves. Let's start with Christian, and then we'll kind of jump into the conversation.
What's up, everyone? My name is Christian Gonzalez. I am visual artist / designer, born and raised in Bogota, Colombia, and I'm currently residing in Los Angeles, California.
And let's go to Jamal next.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jamal James. I am an actor currently in Spring Green, Wisconsin, but I wish I was residing in Los Angeles right now. I wish.
Yes.
Right now it's gloomy and rainy and disgusting, and I'm over it. I'm over the cold. I'm over all that stuff. But yeah, I'm an actor and a writer.
Great. Thank you for that. And let's end it out with Tristan.
Hi, everyone. I'm Tristan Chirico. I am a mental health social practitioner at Fountain House, which is a community mental health center. And we work primarily with adults diagnosed with serious mental illness, and that's in New York City.
Nice. And everyone, I am Tony Mitchell. I'm the Director of State Government Affairs for Gilead Sciences. Not as cool as any of these other guys here, but I'm certainly looking forward to kind of hearing the thoughts of you guys around mental health. So let's just go ahead and jump in. Mental health can be a difficult conversation to have, and we strive to end the shame and silence and stimulate the awareness from all angles. On this night, we'll kind of shine a light around the viewpoints that aren't always talked about, the role of gender-related social pressures, as I mentioned before. But really, we'd just love to get your perspective. So, fellas, please feel free to be vulnerable. And just be real, because I think, the things that you guys have to say will be very helpful to our audience and the people that watch this later on. So I'm going to jump out there with a question, and let's round robin, and then we'll reverse order on the next question. Christian, we're going to start off with you. Just kind of give me a background of your story of mental health. Like, how did you start your journey? Walk us through that. I would love to hear that.
Yeah. Being born and raised in Colombia, obviously, when it comes to Spanish culture, there's some sort of archaic goal line for the way a boy or a boy should be raised. A boy is being raised to be a man, and obviously we all know kind of the standard cues of what back in the day made a man, which was a little bit of more locking emotions in, being what they back in the day we'll call level-headed, and make sure that you make the right decisions and whatnot. So growing up, I always felt pretty much like an emotional boy. I would cry easily, the whole nine. And it wasn't until my early 20s, I would say, that I started getting onto social media and experiencing those type of feelings where you're comparing yourself constantly to the lives that other people are living. I was figuring out what to do with my career. And it was during a time where Donald Trump had just won as president, and my mom was living in Colombia. So I was experiencing a lot of emotions from not only my culture side, but also discovering myself. And it took a pretty gnarly breakup with a past ex that really kind of opened up this wound that I thought time would heal, but it really wasn't. And I just really had a close friend of mine who lived in New York, and he was part of a team that dealt with the suicide crisis line. And if it wasn't for for them guiding me in a way of where to seek help. I don't know honestly where I would be today. But yeah, it led me to a therapist named Vicky Watering. So shout out to her for showering me with wisdom and ways to really dissect and like analyze my emotions, and teaching me that, you know, depression, at least for me as a person, it's sometimes a sign that like as an artist you need to really take care of yourself.
Sure.
It was viewing it like shit. It like painted it in such a different perspective, because obviously, you know, you hear the word depression and it just carries such weight.
Yeah.
But it was one of those things that like the way that she painted it to me was, you know, sometimes your body and your mind really shows signs for you to like you know, you need to love yourself, you know, you got
Right.
to show
Yeah.
yourself some love. And yeah, and once that happened, it kind of like opened up this whole new world of creativity and creating with emotion and creating
Yeah.
with purpose in a way. And I've been super blessed, you know, like to get to know people too that move in the field. And yeah, and just kind of like learn, you know, I'm not a professional. I started as a graphic designer,
Yeah.
you know, making you know, mental health awareness posters for myself, because I found myself so much on my phone scrolling down on Instagram. So they like became this anchor point for me to like be like, yo,
Nice.
hold up, you know, yeah, like there's people out there living their lives and that's amazing, but you got your own purpose too. You know, you gotta like step back, breathe, you know, you gotta cry,
Yeah.
you
No,
know, do
you
your thing.
no, that's no, I appreciate that. I mean, you said a few things that kind of really, you know, spoke to me. One, this social media age is a very difficult monster in itself. And then culture, you know, I think culture kind of defines who we are and how we kind of react in certain situations. And I think that's always a big either guiding force or block for people when they
Yeah.
deal with mental health. And so I appreciated that transparency there. And fellas, you know, let's go to Jamal. Would love to kind of hear again, like, what's your story of mental health, and you know, and please interweave anything that Christian said to kind of talk towards, you know, your journey.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you, Christian. It, what I've noticed as I've gotten older, as if I'm old, I'm not, but I, uh, as I've gotten older, my journey with mental health is I feel like even it feels like in its adolescence, because talking about mental health is such a new thing. So not like a new thing, but something that is prevalent in our culture in such a way that people talk about it very openly, and it's on social media and it's everywhere. People are having those type of discussions. But to go on to Christian's point, I had a very different upbringing with my parents, and I didn't realize how different it was until I got a little bit older and went to college. Like my dad, like I cry easily. No matter, shoot, I'll watch. Maybe not Titanic, but like I'll watch Hook and I'll cry all the time. Like it just I can get emotionally invested in something that I'm watching. And
Yeah.
my dad never made me feel guilty about crying. Like never.
Wow.
He never made me feel guilty about it.
Wow.
He'd be like, oh man, why are you doing that? You doing that? Oh, that's cool. It wasn't like a just be like, oh, it's okay, it's okay.
He
He would like try to
normalized it.
reassure
Yeah.
me
Yeah.
through something that I was going through, or like when I hurt myself or stubbed my toe, like it's just like something like that was normal. But my dad is a very person who keeps his emotions inside. Like he'll say something, but like I've seen my dad cry maybe like 4 times. It's like a funeral or something that's like felt like he did something to unfortunate to hurt me or something like that, where he was just like, I didn't realize that I did something or said something that was hurtful to you. But he's a very like emotionally kept person.
Yeah.
And he said, he said to me that he's never gonna tell me that I can't cry. He just said, I just don't think you should cry about everything. And I
Yeah.
was like, I see that. And as an adult, I'm like, ooh, there's discernment, there's wisdom in that, of like knowing that there's situations when you are allowed to feel emotional and you're allowed to cry and all those kind of things. There's also a way of like dealing with stuff. That for him is like, this is being a man. It's like being emotionally available, but being able to use wisdom throughout different situations.
Sure.
And so I didn't realize how different that was until I guess I guess I was in college, and like people were saying like, "Ooh, this is what you need to do in order to fit. This is what you need to do in order to fit that stereotype. This is what you need to do in order to be a man." And I'd be like, oh, "It feels weird." Like a good portion of my friends growing up were women, were girls. I just like I felt more camaraderie sometimes of being able to talk. Like there was a lot of boys that would talk about the same things, and I get bored, and I'd be like, "Oh, I'm going to talk to these people," because I talk to girls and talk to women, and it'd be like, it'd be an emotional bandwidth of like conversation, and I always loved that. Like I read books. I was big into literature. So like as I've gone older and dealing with myself as a man and also as a Black man in our country,
Sure.
mental health is very, very different. Like in the Black community, sometimes you bring up a problem. I know as a stereotype, you bring up a problem to someone, and someone would be like, "So what? You don't need to go talk to no therapist. Just walk it off. Like deal with it and walk it off." And that's something that is generationally a thing, that our generation and younger are not saying that we should just walk things off. I'm literally figuring out how to be like, "Oh, I remember what it was when I was a kid. I think I need to keep those lessons because those
Yeah.
lessons were good for me." It sort of seems like a circle. I'm coming back to something that I
Yeah.
knew
Yeah.
beforehand before I let
Yeah.
the world get in here.
Right. Right.
I'm figuring out now that the world didn't need to. I didn't need to succumb to anything about the world. I didn't need to take any lessons from the world outside. I had some lessons that were just golden. So as I grow up, as I try to solidify myself as a man, there's a lot of things there's a lot of noise, unfortunately. And I don't know if this is even in my bio, but right now I teach a racial education program also in Wisconsin to go to predominantly white/rural areas and talk about race, but introduce like literature of protagonists of color by authors of color in high schools in rural Wisconsin. And it is interesting talking to young men and women who are white just about things that they believe in and things that they feel strong about. And mental health is like a big, 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 big thing that that they can't really wait to have a conversation about, but it's hard because their parents technically aren't speaking. They don't feel like their parents are speaking about it.
Yeah.
And many different issues. So that's
Okay.
something that I am wrestling with and going through to this day. So like, I feel like I'm an adolescent when exposing the mental health conversation, if that
Yeah.
makes any sense.
Yeah, no, it's certainly a journey, you know, and I think we always have to remember that it's a journey. It takes time. You know, there's no way that the 16-year-old version of you would be as mentally prepared as you are now, but for the experiences that you kind of had. So, I appreciated that moment there. And one thing you said that I constantly think about, I'm a father and I have a young 2-year-old. And I try to normalize those moments of just vulnerability, normalize being able to like talk through emotions. And I think you hit the nail on the head, Jamal. I think as an African-American male, you're brought up tough, you're brought up hard. You kind of hear, that the world is a tough place, and your parents want to prepare you for that. But I think that in the midst of that, we also have to develop EQ, emotional intelligence, and being able to kind of talk through those vulnerable moments and painful moments and tough moments and things where we're confused. I think is so important to our mental health as we grow. So I'm so happy to hear that your father allowed you to be who you are, allowed you to be vulnerable, allowed you to be, to cry when you need to cry, because everyone needs to, no one can hold it up. When you hold it up, it builds up, and then that's when an explosion happens. So
yeah, I was like, my mom was more strict. My mom was like,
yeah,
but there's reasons why she would be that way. She'd be like, the world is going to look at you differently based on how you grow up. Your innocence is going to be gone before 12. Like yeah. That's how she was raised to be.
Right.
And so that's a hard line to walk.
No, I agree.
Yeah.
Well, let's move to Tristan. I would love to kind of hear about your story and your mental health journey.
Sure. I'm happy to share. So I think it's fair to say I was probably born with a pretty strong tendency towards depression, an inborn tendency. I was a happy kid in a happy family, but as early as I can remember, talking 5, 6 years old, I would spend, I'd have these sort of melancholy moods where I would just spend a lot of time wishing I didn't exist, from very early on. And I say this, but I do want to emphasize most of my life was pretty happy, but there was always this core that really struggled with these very dark thoughts, and that kind of evolved when I was an adolescent, and coming to terms with my own sexuality and facing a culture that was not willing to accept me as a gay person coming into my own self. And so pretty much from the age of 13 onwards, this pressure really started to have a very profound impact on my mental well-being. I developed a pretty intense complex of obsessive compulsive tendencies. I haven't talked about this a lot, even with friends and family, but I developed pretty elaborate rituals to change this terrible part of myself.
Yeah.
Walking only every other stair on the stairway, turning the tap a certain number of times, saying certain things to myself. Sometimes none of it made sense, of course, but I was convinced that if I just did these right things, then I would be normal. I grew up in a very accepting family. My parents, I knew, of course, at some level that they would accept me no matter what. I had out LGBT folks in my community, in my immediate family as well. But our society is so profoundly hateful towards people who are different,
Yeah.
that I really internalized it, and certainly thought of ending my life quite a few times, and came out my senior year to kind of a small group of people in my family, went off to college, and a lot of that just changed instantaneously once I was able to express my love for people that I felt love towards, intimate love. I could be myself in that very particular way.
Yeah.
The tics disappeared. A lot of the dark thoughts disappeared. Not all of them, and I'll get to that in a second. But having the opportunity to express myself and be who I am changed a lot, and I hope for other folks going through what I went through, that they have the opportunity to have role models and messaging going out to them that it is okay for them to be who they truly are. Sadly, I think right now we're in a moment where there's a pretty wide effort to combat that, and with a lot of the legislation that's being passed all around the country, to suppress any kind of affirming, supportive messaging towards LGBT youth.
Sure. Yeah.
But life moves on, and this part of my identity I came to really love, but I have struggled with depression for until now.
Yeah.
I've been hospitalized. I have had to disrupt the course of my life numerous times because of kind of mental health crises. I want to be as kind of open about this as possible, because I think it's very important for mental health professionals to share their own mental health struggles. I think there's a lot of stigma everywhere about serious mental illness, but particularly in the mental health field. So yeah, I want to be quite candid, and also to let people know out there that as a a queer person with serious mental illness, it is possible to get to the point where you can have an enormously happy, satisfying life. Took me a long time to figure out my path, but I did. So that's
Yeah,
the good
yeah.
news.
No, that's great and powerful. I appreciate the transparency there. And you talked about mentorship. Who knows, like you may be the person on this call, who is providing a light to someone else. So thank you so much for kind of sharing that. And I want to kind of pivot on a theme that a lot of you guys talked about. We talked about that adolescent time frame and being young and kind of going through some of those changes there. And would love just your perspective. Like, why don't young men or young boys talk about mental health? Like, what is the gap there? What is the block there? And let's go reverse order. Tristan, I'll go back to you this time.
Sure. Well, I guess from my own experience, I would say that there's a lot of policing around gender norms, especially as relates to, as Jamal and Christian both mentioned, around expressions of feelings and vulnerability. I mean, I got a lot of heat for being different when I was a kid, and was bullied quite a bit. But it's funny because sometimes I was bullied for being you know visibly queer in certain
Yeah,
ways, or the message was getting out there. But a lot of the times the a lot of the bullying was around, oh, you're too nice, you're too sweet, you're too
yeah,
gentle, you're too polite. And so the way that I was kind of violating what it means in sort of a maybe traditional sense, toxic sense, to be a man was I I was kind and or which made me seem weak or soft.
right.
And maybe the particular way that I was manifesting that, I think, was perceived maybe as womanly or
Yeah,
effeminate. And so, you know, as though the alternative was that I should be ready to like fight at the drop of a hat, whatever
right.
it might be.
Which is not
Um,
productive.
right, which is not productive. And so um, I guess I would say, why don't um, kids, young men, boys talk more about their mental health? Uh, I think, as I said, I think they're being policed by their peers, certainly by their elders, by the models that they see in, on TV and social media. So
Yeah,
it's pretty much my
no,
experience, and I'm so excited to hear from everyone else.
yeah, no, me too. Me too. Thank you for that. Jamal, let's jump to you.
Yeah, so speaking as someone who has also suffered from depression, but like a lot later, um, as after college, after graduating, a lot later, I suffered a little bit of depression and thoughts of and suicidal thoughts. Um, for me, I think the reason why, one, it doesn't come as a young age is because, one, either parents feel ill-equipped to speak about those things,
Yeah,
whether they choose to speak about those things or whether they just feel like, I'll leave it to somebody else to speak about it, like school. Um, and just a feeling of like, sometimes I think boys lack the tools to talk about it themselves when they're just growing up, when
yeah,
they're just learning about their feelings and what to do with it. Um, like I won't say this man's name, but recently a friend of mine who is a father, has two boys. He reached out to me and was like, "Hey, I caught one of my sons looking at porn on their computer, and I'm not sure how to talk to them about it for the dangers that, because I don't know what to say. I literally don't know what to say."
yeah,
And he felt comfortable coming up to me because I told him that in my history I had dealt with that a little bit.
sure.
Of times which was in a time of me being alone and being depressed and like just traveling on my own. And I dealt with that my own accordingly. And I was like, I didn't feel like talking to my parents about that when it happened. And I was like, I think you need to sit down with your sons and have a real discussion with them about what that means,
Yeah.
even about sex and about gender, and about like to talk to them and not just be like, boys will be boys. They're going to find it like there's something that happens when you think about the phrase boys will be boys, or that they have to be a certain way in order to grow up. It's like we skirt a huge mountain of conversations, a huge mountain of growth and understanding, to just be like, let's stereotype our gender. Let's just do that, and that's the way it is, and that's just that's an easy thing. It's not the honest thing. It's just
Yeah.
easy. It makes things more comfortable for us, generally as a whole, instead of being like, there's problems here that are developmental for children. And we should talk about that, and we should be open to their experiences and their feelings, and like have an honest space or a brave space to talk about things, to really listen. I think I think boys don't feel like they can be listened to, that they have to give the right answer, and an answer that will be acceptable. So that's why I think it's a problem. I think honesty is lacking sometimes.
No, that's big. You know, it kind of puts me in a place. And again, it's, as a father now, I view a lot of things through the lens of being a father. You know, making sure that there's a relationship there between you and your child. And I think, you know, that may be a very simple way of kind of saying it, but when there isn't a relationship there, it's hard to have conversations about a lot of things. And I think for adolescents, there's so many changes going on. You know, I thought back about middle school the other day, and I was just like, oh my gosh, just the changes that happen in middle school and elementary school, the level of exposure that kids have to the internet now. You know, I remember, you know, in middle school for me, like AOL dial-up was not conducive to watching a lot of porn. You know, it was hard. So there's so much at kids' fingertips these days that you have to have a relationship there to catch wind of what's going on. Otherwise, you're just like, oh, they're just on Twitter, where it's just like, what are they doing on Twitter? What are they doing on these? So you got to have a conversation. So I appreciate just kind of hearing that. You know, Christian, would love to kind of hear your thoughts there as well.
Yeah, I mean, Tristan and Jamal both tapped into things that are very key onto it. You know, when Tristan said that showing vulnerability or emotion, it's viewed as a sign of being soft, or someone that, you know, that's just too kind, you know, like being too nice. Jamal, when you tap into boys will be boys, that term, you know, that's such a paper over crack, you know. And to me, when I think back at my teenage years, and I don't know if anyone else feels it, but you feel like you're watching a movie. Like the
Yeah.
way you view life back then, it's like a movie, you know, like Boys in the Hood, or like those type of movies,
Yeah.
like the movie Kids, where it's just like, you know, it's raw, it's edgy. And I know for sure, you know, growing up in Miami, you know, after moving to the States, you know, at 9, it was one of those things. And one of the challenges that I feel were massive to me was, oh, in a way, the baggage that my parents came with, you know, from their childhood. Something that I think is like, you know, a bit overlooked is our parents are humans too, you know. And it's really tough, like especially at that young age, to see him as that, you know, because you know, you see, you know, as your rock, as your shelter. But like, it was something that I realized later on, like in my late teens, because I mean, the relationship I had with my mom was so transparent and so open, uh, that I started to realize that, you know, that how I wished I would have, you know, viewed certain things that they would say to me from like a, a lookout perspective. But at the same time, some of the things that they taught me were things that they were passed down through generations for them. And one thing that like it's very tough to really, you know, or is that hasn't been really chatted about, is we're dealing with like against archaic things that were passed down for generations. And I think like we're like in such a pivotal stage when it comes to talk about mental health, because we are going against the grain on something that's been so swept under the rug for so long. But that was one of the big ones for me, you know.
Yeah.
It's just understanding that like my parents were humans too, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And it's you know, like, I mean, and you ask yourself now, you know, you being a parent, I'm not a parent. I'm a dog parent. but,
That's a parent.
but
That's how it started.
you know, it's a thing, but it's one of those things where you're like, man, like, and nowadays, you know, I think with the introduction of social media, there is something that's become dark, but also there's some light to it. And there's been, you know, just as much as there's been like this essence of like, you know, comparisons and like bullying that goes on online, I think there's a lot of kids being developed as activists and, you know, strong people that like stand for in a way the people that are feeling weaker in certain times.
Yeah.
But yeah, I do feel that like back in those days for me, it was just like there's a lot of teenagers that like are being taught certain things that their parents couldn't deal with in their youth, you know.
Yeah.
So you're essentially, it's a bunch of flowers that are being watered with water that has some sort of baggage or some sort
Sure.
of things that are just like taught for them from their when they're young.
Yeah, and I think that's a really tough thing for parents at times. It's like you
Yeah.
don't realize until you take a step back from the situation is that like a lot of parents project a lot of their insecurities and things that they've dealt with on their kids
Yeah.
unknowingly, you know.
Exactly.
And I don't, you know, I give parents the credit that I don't think that they would do it if they understood it. But when parents don't deal with some of the issues that they have had from their childhood or how they were raised or from their schooling or whatever that is, a lot of those things become normalized in our minds because we haven't talked about it as parents to anyone else. So it's just like, this is what I know, this is what I do.
Yeah.
So you know, that's really good insight, Christian. I appreciate you sharing that. You know, I want to move to the next question. Jamal, I want to start with you here, because you touched on it earlier. You know, are there some cultural or racial barriers that you kind of experienced in your life that have really just kind of shaped your mental health journey? And I would love for each of, you know, the gentlemen here, and I'll even jump in a bit on myself, to kind of express that, because I think that we have four different people from four different walks of lives. And I think that that piece is a real pivotal piece that we have to talk about a lot more often.
Yeah. So I guess the term of the talk, the racial talk was given to me by my mom when I was 9 years old. And I didn't really think much of it because I was just like, yeah, people are different colors. Like, that's cool. Yeah, I'm great. I'm not like, I'm 9. Can I just go around and kick grass, kick rocks, or jump off rooftops? Like, I'm 9. You're not thinking about like
Right.
color as a negative thing. My
Yeah.
mom was like, no, people will actually think differently and might want to hurt you based on the fact that you are Black. And I was like, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. Because it is. It's technically the stupid, like, oh, someone
It is.
said a
Yeah.
long time ago that color's less than. And I think that means that that person's life, it should be, I could discard their life easily. And I was like, that just the break, just even thinking about it today seems insane. But I do know that because she told me that, because it was the right thing to do, as my mom and my parents were like trying to inform me about the way I was inheriting a system of being in this country and around the world, that racism is a thing. It would color a lot of things in my life. It would color my schoolwork with my friends. I would often be like, am I accepted by them just because am I what's the term, a token in this? Like, do I have things that I have to subscribe to be a Black person growing up?
Yeah.
Like, people like, Jamal, do you play basketball? I'd be like, no. Oh, your Black card is revoked. Like, I would get jokes like that when I was growing up as a young man. And there's just so many times when I've just been like hit in the face of where my Blackness is not a boon as a human being. Like, it would color some relationships. Like, when I would go dating out with people who were white, like there were some ladies that I would go out on dates with. Like, one person I remember vividly, this was actually a part of my depression. The one thing that started my depression, make me feel lonely. I went on a date with a woman in Cincinnati. I think this was 2013, 2014, this white woman. And I thought the date was going great. And then at the end of the date, she said, like, I think you're nice and funny and comfortable, but I can't date you because you're a Black guy.
Oh, wow.
And I remember the feeling of like, Jamal, be nice in this moment. Jamal, be nice in this moment. Jamal, be nice in this moment. You know, you're kind. Come on, be nice in this moment. And I remember I remember wanting to say, I think that you are a disgusting human being for saying that. Like I wanted to say those words and those didn't work. Those did not come out my mouth. But I let her go about her day and I drove off and I didn't try to not think anything of it, but I felt extremely lonely, and that loneliness overstayed its welcome in me thinking that I am not valid in my own life.
Yeah.
And I want to say that thank you, Tristan, for talking about, like, I know what it feels like to be alone, and you are not alone. You're not. I want you to know that for a fact. And solidifying, like making my own decisions, trying to choose myself, and like I love people. I love people's ideas. I don't want to say that I need people, but I also am like, yo, I need people because I like believing in others. Like I think people are awesome, even when like the worst things come out. Like when you just like don't have a like belief in humanity, I'm like, nah, man, I still believe in humanity. I still got hope. Like I'm a Christian. I have faith for myself.
Yeah.
And that has saved my life many a time. But I would say that race in this country has colored a lot of depressive moments for me. And I wish that when it did come to times with dealing with white people who were not looking for my heart in that way, that I had more strength to stand up for myself instead of succumb to my feelings. But it's hard. It was hard sometimes. I'm coming into terms of like how to strengthen my brain and my voice and my body and let that just be like, I'm enough. Like I'm enough just for existing. I think it's hard for Black boys, but like just boys in general to believe, like we talk about, like boys are in power, they're strong, and they walk around confident. And I'm like, I can understand that to a certain degree, but I do think that there's sometimes a hard moment in a boy's life to think that they are actually beautiful, like they're actually important and valued, and that if they have a different idea of what it means to be a boy or a man, that will be accepted.
Yeah.
I think that's really difficult for others to understand sometimes. So that's if as best I can in a nutshell.
That was great. That was great. No, I that's really good perspective. You know, I remember, you know, I'm a military brat. I've moved a lot. And I remember moving to Hawaii in the 2nd grade, and I was lost. It was culturally different, racially different. There was so much going on there that the first time I heard someone call me the N-word was there, and it shook me. I really didn't even know. Like I had went, like my father's a pastor. Like I kind of grew up in a very religious home, and you know we didn't really use words like that. And the first time I heard someone not Black say that to me, I was broken. I was broken because, and it wasn't even the word, because I don't think I really understood the magnitude of the word at the time. I think you feel the hate and just recklessness in the tone that people say it in. And you're just like, wow, you're trying to cut me. And to feel that in the 2nd grade, that was tough. So yes, I think the racial component is important for people to kind of think about, because I always say you're only as strong as your perspective. So your perspective, Tristan's perspective, Christian's perspective, all of that should help me kind of dictate how I move throughout life, because I realize that like I'm not the only person here. There are people from New York, there are people from Los Angeles, there are people from different parts of the world that think completely different based on the way they were raised. So Jamal, thank you for sharing that. Tristan, I would love to kind of hear your perspective. You're from New York, and I know that's a place that is considered rough and tough, and you know there's so many different connotations people have about New York, and so culturally I'm sure you have some perspective there, and racially I would love to hear as well.
Oh, sure. I mean, I think maybe what I would want to talk about right away is, I work in mental health. I work at a community center, Fountain House, and we've been doing a lot of work as a community right now to sort of confront racism, racial injustice, even kind of within ourselves, within our own community. And there are just so many ways that the current mental health crisis that we find ourselves in is tied up with, intertwined with racism and the history of racial trauma
Yeah.
in this country. It's been, I'm learning so much. I still have so much to learn about ways that people's personal experiences with racism have shaped their own kind of experiences with mental illness. I mean, there's some very clear sort of intersections there that shape people's experiences. You know, also worth, I think, taking a step back and reflecting on who our sort of social and medical systems are providing adequate care to, who has access to adequate mental health care and support. You know, I have my share of struggles, but I also have an enormous amount of privilege. You know, being white, being born cisgender, being, you know, born in a middle-class family. I, you know, did have access to mental health resources that I know many people don't. And so I think if we are to address some of the profound collective, as I said, kind of mental health crises that we find ourselves in the middle of, we're also going to have to do a lot of work around exploring how the history of racial injustice and racial trauma in this country impacts all of us. I think, you know, we're all involved in it. There's a book I would really recommend to everyone here. It's called My Grandmother's Hands by Resmaa Menakem, which is, you know, about kind of the psychological and somatic work that we can do to reflect and try to start to undo. So I don't know, there's a lot to say, and I'm not necessarily someone with the most insight.
You said a lot, and one thing I really want to acknowledge that you said was, you know, being able to realize the level of privilege that you have, and realizing that, how do you help others through that lens, you know? So that's something that I think that would do a lot of people good, to just have that understanding of like, hey, not everyone's from a middle-class family. Not everyone was raised the way that I was. Not everyone has experienced the things. Not everyone has access to the level of healthcare. Access is such a huge hurdle for people to have. That, you know, I want to acknowledge that. So thank you for sharing that. Christian, would love to kind of hear your thoughts there as well.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing I will say is, from my perspective, I think I could shed like light on the perspective of people that move here from outside countries. Just because it was a big part of a summer depression I had when I was 26, and when growing up in Colombia, you know, we hear about the American dream here, you know, and growing up in Colombia, the American dream, the perspective is so different. It's, you come here and dude, same ball game as everyone else, you know, like you'll come here, you'll get the same shots, you know,
Yeah.
same opportunities. And I remember moving here in 3rd grade and realizing, like, from that, you know, young age, going into my first classroom in Miami, and, you know, sitting down in a room that no one understood me. Like, I couldn't talk to anyone. I think I could only talk to another fellow. His name was Felipe. You know, thank you, Felipe, out there, for being my first friend. But only because
Shout out to Felipe.
Right? Only because he spoke Spanish. And the only way I could communicate was drawing. So at the time, I was a big Dragon Ball Z head, and I just had to draw Goku. So, you know, and that's how I made my first friend ever during lunch.
Yeah.
But then I remember that kind of being taken away, because obviously if you don't speak English, you have to go to ESOL. So that's when I started realizing, oh, like, it's not the American dream that really, that's really portrayed from outside,
Yeah.
and I remember from that day forward, just internally, because at the time I was so young, I didn't really have a good communication, like expressing my feelings to my mom
Yeah.
nor my dad. And I remember telling myself, you have to sacrifice your Spanish culture so you can make it in this country.
That's tough.
And in that way was, you know what? I'm not gonna hang out much with Spanish homies. I'm gonna make friends with white friends, black friends, Asian friends, all cultures. Learn English, make sure I lose my accent, make sure make sure you become as white as possible. Because even though I haven't like experienced any like racial like violent crime towards myself, like I've known of friends, that have experienced, those type of things, but it's just kind of like the trauma that like a young kid moving from a foreign country has to go with to in order to survive here. You
Yeah.
have to sacrifice your roots
I mean,
to a
you become a
certain.
chameleon, man. You have to blend in.
Yeah. And I remember feeling completely horrible and like this gutted feeling the first time I had a dream in English,
Mm.
and realizing that the more and more I push towards this goal of being like an American, a male American, the more I was breaking up or in a way killing my root.
Yeah.
And it didn't really hit me till like I was 26, when I realized, the amount of like injustice that was going on towards, African Americans and all that stuff. It just like like this sacrifice that people have to make in order to like really please this system,
Yeah.
and that takes a massive toll, and like till this day still kind of like haunts me, the fact that I spent so many years not really like nurturing my culture. I didn't go back to Colombia for like almost like 18 years,
Yeah.
18, 19 years.
And I think the
And
harder part is almost like, yes, of course, like I think we all have to water ourselves, but I think other people around us have to water us as well, because I think sometimes your hand gets tired of kind of holding that
yeah,
bucket over yourself. So it's just like, yeah, nurture yourself, but like it's a shame that there weren't people around you that nurtured you and your culture, because just because of the sheer interest.
yeah. And I
Like,
grew up in a home where my mom would speak Spanish at home. Like that was the
yeah,
number one rule. But I remember arguing with my mom, like, then how am I gonna get, how am I gonna lose this accent if all I do is speak Spanish at home? Like that was part of our bickering, like my
yeah,
bickering to her. It's just like what, like when I think back at it now, it's like,
it
oh
just
man, like
seems
that was
juvenile,
my
right?
argument. I'm just like,
Yeah,
that's so to me, so like it's a subliminal like sacrifice. Like you don't know it
yeah.
until you really, really think about it.
But I think that in itself speaks to the level of pressure that you feel from just the outside, especially in school. It's just like there's so much going on in a child's head when they're different.
Yeah.
And to not be accepted by anyone in that moment, you feel there are no other options. So yeah, like you bicker with your mom because you feel like, mom, it is
Yeah.
social suicide for me to go to school every day speaking Spanish because no one talks to me and you don't understand that. So it kind of leads me into a question that we received from one of our audience members, that I would love you guys' perspective. And I know we're kind of a little short on time, so if we could kind of keep this one to like about a minute and a half, and we'll go rapid fire. What advice would you have for parents who are raising boys now? And how can we do a better job of raising our sons to be comfortable talking about their mental health when doing so can cause them to be seen as weird and could cost them socially? And Christian, I would love if you can kind of continue on some of your points, and we'll go
Yeah.
Christian, Tristan, and then Jamal. We'll end it out with you.
Yeah. The one thing I would say is just like listen, just try to understand, because as an emotional boy myself, sometimes like emotions really do rapid fire feelings, and
Yeah,
the way we express ourselves. But like the one thing that I really loved, and my mother to me in my eyes is the queen of everything, is just
yeah,
how patient and very open ear she was. And whenever we would talk about certain things, she would just research it, no judging behind it, and just talk to me next time I was ready to like open up to her. So I
Nice.
would say just a lot of patience, understanding, and listening could go a really, really long way into a boy's life. And
Yeah.
just, just be very open to the answers, just have no expectation at the end of the day.
No,
The
that's
conversation just will go on its own journey.
great advice. Just be willing to go with the flow there. And I think in those moments you wind up learning a lot that you didn't know and learning a lot about your child. So Tristan, let's bounce over to you.
Sure. So I'll go ahead and put my parents' emails in the chat because I think it'd be pretty hard to do a better job than they did. Of course, Christian, as you said, a lot of it had to do with listening, with being patient. I think being open to your kids as they try to figure out who they are. I think any parent will be confronted with, a day or a time when their kid will say something just very unexpected or very strange, very out of character. And when we're young, we try on lots of different ways of being. And I guess apart from my parents' email addresses, the thing that I would want to share with parents is just respect your kids' journeys as they explore who they are, and look for opportunities to support them when they want to try out some new way of existing in the world, and respect that and nurture it.
Nice. No, great advice. Great advice. And I'm sure everyone's waiting on you to drop your parents' emails in the chat. Jamal, please jump out there.
Gosh, I think it's hard for me to follow up both of those answers, but I think for me, and I'm coloring this with a little bit just because I've been in so many high schools recently, is that one, if you're children, students, kids, they don't like things to be so easy in general. There's a little bit of a challenge that is okay. So when it comes to questions that you really want to get answered, be specific about them. Like, it's not enough to just say, how was your day at school? Did you learn anything? Like, that's actually not digging. So I would say that when it comes to like, how do you want to parent? How do you want to have conversations? Be specific with your words. Really be specific with your words. And there are resources out there. There are resources to figure out how to talk to your children in a way that is conducive for them to have their own answers, not what they want you to hear. Like, sometimes the students that I've talked to have been like, yeah, I've been at home and I feel like I just have to tell like my mom or my dad like what they need to hear in order for me to like, for them to be pleased.
Yeah.
And I think, as I said before, like, honesty is a big thing. I was like, just tell me the truth, be honest with me. Like, I think that's something that does need to be honed, and be like, don't worry about my feelings. I want to know what you feel. I want to know what you feel about schooling, and what you feel about gender, what you feel about race. What do you feel about issues that are really important as they grow up, and let their answer be their answer. And that is it. Not to appease you as a parent, not to appease society, not to appease anybody else.
Yeah.
Let their answers speak for themselves. Let them be unique to themselves. So I think if I have to say that, like, when you ask a question, you be specific about it. You be specific about what you want from your child.
No, that's good. That's good. Well, I've come away from this conversation with so much, and I want to just thank you all for sharing and being so vulnerable with myself and everyone that's watching. I certainly hope that just some of the words that have been spoken today wind up being an inspiration to someone else, and really kind of helps recenter someone, because you never know just like what a conversation like this, the level of impact that it can kind of have on someone's life. So thank you, gentlemen. Also, just thank you to the Youth Mental Health Project. You all are doing some amazing work. I certainly wish when I was in middle school or high school that I would, had the opportunity to listen to something like this, just because of the impact and the ability to kind of reshift the narrative, that a discussion like this can have. So, I mentioned earlier that we are in the midst of Youth Mental Health Awareness Week, and we want to help raise some funds around just amplifying some of this work that's being done. And I believe in the chat, there is a link to a way that you can kind of donate to kind of help with, work in this space. So again, thank you, gentlemen. And, I would love to stay in contact with you all, once we kind of, leave this place, just to check in, honestly, just to see how you all are doing, and to, if I can ever be a voice or a resource, or just someone to kind of text every now and then when you feel like you may not have someone. I want to be that for you all. So thank you guys so much. Again, thank you to the Youth Mental Health Project, and hopefully this has been a blessing to someone else. So the donate link is up. You can scan the QR code. But until next time, we will see you all soon. Thank you so much for the conversation.